Returning from chemo with my daughter and her husband, we drove past a Porsche dealership. He said, "That's my dream car," without hesitation. My daughter pulled my credit card from her purse and handed it to him. "Use mom's card. She has $500,000 saved and won't live long enough to spend it." 3 days later, they were both in jail and I was in a Porsche. If you're watching this, make sure to subscribe and tell me where you're tuning in from. This story gets wild, and you'll definitely want to hear how it ends. The drive home should have felt like a celebration. Sarah's husband, Marcus, was unusually chatty from the driver's seat. Talking about weekend plans and summer trips like my future was something certain again. I watched the familiar streets of downtown Phoenix roll by through the window, feeling lighter than I had in months. Then we passed Henderson's luxury cars, and everything changed. "Stop the car," Marcus said suddenly, his voice thick with excitement. There, gleaming under the Arizona sun like a silver jewel, was a Porsche 911. "That's it," he whispered. "That's my dream car. I've wanted one since I was 16, before either Sarah or I could protest." He pulled into the lot and parked right in front of it like he was afraid it might vanish. Sarah rolled her eyes but smiled. "Marcus, we're not buying a Porsche today. Mom just finished chemo, for heaven's sake." But Marcus was already out of the car. Circling the Porsche like a predator eyeing prey, a salesman appeared, smiling wide. "Beautiful car, isn't she? Just came in yesterday, 2023 model, only 8,000 miles. Previous owner barely drove it." Marcus's eyes gleamed. "What's the asking price?" "78,000, the salesman said smoothly. "But for the right buyer, there's some flexibility." Sarah and I exchanged looks. Marcus made decent money as an engineer, but $78,000 was more than his yearly salary. Still, watching him look at that car, it was like watching a man fall in love. "We should go," Sarah said softly. "Mom needs to rest." But I couldn't look away from Marcus's face. I'd never seen that kind of hunger before. In the 3 years since their wedding, I'd grown genuinely fond of him. He'd been kind, hardworking, supportive through my cancer treatments. If anyone deserved a dream, I thought, maybe it was him. Then Sarah did something that made my heart stop. Without hesitation, without asking, she reached into my purse, pulled out my credit card, and handed it to Marcus. "Use mom's card," she said casually, like she was offering a pen. "She's got over $500,000 saved. She won't live long enough to spend it all anyway." Her words hit me like a punch. The casual cruelty. The assumption that my death was a countdown. The realization that she'd discussed my finances, my life with her husband. I sat frozen in the back seat as Marcus took the card, no hesitation, no shame. The salesman was already grabbing the paperwork, his grin stretching wider. "We can have this processed within the hour," he said eagerly. "Just need to run the card and handle the title transfer." I should have said something. Should have snatched my card back. But I was still weak, dazed from my last round of chemo. My mind fogged by exhaustion and disbelief. So I sat there in stunned silence, watching my daughter and her husband spend my money on a car I'd never drive, celebrating my survival by planning for my death. The paperwork took 47 minutes. I know because I watched every second tick by on the dealership's wall clock, my mind slowly clearing as the reality of what was happening sank in. By the time Marcus slid behind the wheel of his new Porsche, I had already made a decision that would change everything. 3 days later, I was sitting in my own silver Porsche 911, watching through the dealership window as my daughter and son-in-law were led away in handcuffs. But that's getting ahead of myself. First, you need to understand how a 68-year-old cancer survivor went from victim to victor in less than 72 hours. The ride home from the dealership was the longest 20 minutes of my life. Marcus drove his new Porsche ahead of us while Sarah followed in our car, chatting excitedly about how handsome her husband looked behind the wheel. I sat in the passenger seat, hands folded in my lap, saying nothing. The silence must have seemed like fatigue to Sarah because she kept glancing over at me with concern. "Are you feeling okay, Mom? Maybe we should have gone straight home instead of stopping." Her voice was gentle, carrying the same tone she'd used throughout my treatment. And it was almost worse than the casual cruelty at the dealership. It was the pretense of concern, the act of pretending she cared about my well-being. "I'm fine," I managed, though I was anything but. My mind raced, replaying her words over and over. "She won't live long enough to spend it anyway." The financial discussion they'd obviously had. The way Marcus had taken my card without hesitation, as if they had planned this moment. It all hit me at one stop when we pulled into my driveway. Marcus was already out of the Porsche, running his hands over every surface like a teenager with his first car. "Helen," he called, using the name he'd always used since the wedding. "Come see how smooth this interior is. This leather is like butter." His enthusiasm was infectious, almost innocent. For a moment, I wondered if I was overreacting. But then I saw the glance he and Sarah exchanged, a look that said they'd gotten away with something. Sarah's shoulders had relaxed, the tension gone, showing she had been nervous about my reaction. They'd gambled on my gratitude for their support during treatment, my exhaustion from chemo, my natural tendency to avoid confrontation. And up until now, they had calculated correctly. You know what? I said, forcing a smile. I think I'd like to take a nap. The treatment always makes me tired. Immediately, Sarah shifted into caregiver mode, helping me up the front steps, fussing over whether I'd eaten enough. Should I make you some soup? Or maybe that ginger tea Dr. Morrison recommended? I'm fine, sweetheart. Just tired. I let her tuck me into bed like a child, accepting her kisses on my forehead and her promises to check on me in a few hours. Through my bedroom window, I could hear Marcus starting the Porsche's engine over and over, revving it like a motorcycle. The sound made my teeth ache. Once they left, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling for exactly 10 minutes. Then I got up, walked to my desk, and opened my laptop. If Sarah and Marcus wanted to discuss my finances, they were about to learn exactly how much money I really had and, more importantly, how a woman doesn't survive 68 years, raise two children, and beat cancer by being naive about people's motives. My first call was to Patricia Williams, my financial advisor at Phoenix National Bank. Patricia had managed my investments since my husband David died 6 years ago, turning his modest life insurance policy and our savings into something substantial. Through careful planning and smart choices, she answered on the second ring. Helen, how did the treatment go today? Patricia's voice was warm, genuinely concerned. Unlike my daughter, Patricia knew my survival odds were good, stage 2 breast cancer. Excellent prognosis. Especially given my overall health and aggressive treatment protocol. Treatment went fine, Patricia. But I need to discuss something urgent about my accounts. I explained what had happened at the dealership, watching Patricia's silence stretch longer with every detail. When I finished, she let out a low whistle. Double quotes, Helen, I have to ask, did you authorize this purchase? Her professional training was kicking in and I could practically hear her taking notes. Absolutely not. And I need to know exactly how much they charged to my card. Plus, I want to understand all my options. Patricia put me on hold while she accessed my accounts. When she returned, her voice was grim. The charge has been processed for $78,000, plus taxes and fees. Total damage, $84,224.70. She paused. Helen, this is a significant amount. If you didn't authorize it, we should report it as fraud, I said clearly. And I want to understand exactly what that means for Sarah and Marcus. Patricia explained the process. Since the purchase was over $50,000 and made without my authorization, it would automatically trigger a federal investigation. The dealership would have to cooperate, providing security footage and documentation. If the FBI determined the purchase was fraudulent, Sarah and Marcus could face charges for felony fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy. The penalties could include significant jail time, she warned. Are you sure you want to go down this road? It's your daughter we're talking about. Her question hung between us. Was I sure? Was I ready to potentially send my only daughter to prison over a car? I thought about her words at the dealership, the casual dismissal of my survival, the way she had discussed my money with her husband as if I were already dead, the calculation in her eyes when she handed over my card. Patricia, I said quietly, they're counting on me being too weak or too grateful to fight back. They're wrong, then we move forward. I'll start the fraud report immediately and freeze the card to prevent any additional charges. As I hung up, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months, not hope this time, but power. For the first time since my diagnosis, I wasn't the victim of circumstance. My second call was to Detective Ramon Santos at the Phoenix Police Department. Ramon had been David's partner for 12 years before David retired, and had stayed in touch with our family ever since. When I explained the situation, his response was immediate and sharp. Helen, this is serious. Even if it's family, fraud is fraud. He paused, though I have to warn you, once this investigation starts, you can't just change your mind if things get uncomfortable. I assured him I understood the implications. Ramon promised to coordinate with the FBI Financial Crimes Unit and suggested I document everything, the timeline, conversations, any evidence of premeditation. That evening, Sarah called to check on me. How are you feeling, Mom? You seemed tired earlier. Her voice was sweet, concerned, completely normal. Like the dealership incident had never happened. I'm feeling much better, I said truthfully. In fact, stronger than I have in months. We chatted about dinner plans for the weekend, Marcus' excitement over his new car, and my upcoming follow-up appointment with Dr. Morrison. Normal mother-daughter conversation, surreal given the storm I had set in motion. After we hung up, I sat on the back patio with a cup of tea. watching the desert sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink in 48 hours. The investigation would be complete. Security footage would confirm I never consented to the purchase. Bank records would show the unauthorized use of my card. My daughter and son-in-law would learn that underestimating a cancer survivor was their biggest mistake, but I wasn't done yet. If they thought $78,000 was worth betraying me for, they had no idea what I was actually worth. The next morning, I woke before dawn, feeling more energetic than I had in months. Maybe it was knowing my treatment was finally over. Or maybe it was the clarity that comes from making a difficult but necessary decision. Either way, I had work to do. My first stop was Henderson's Luxury Cars, where I arrived just as they opened at 9. The same salesman who had processed Marcus' purchase yesterday greeted me with enthusiasm. Reserved for customers who don't ask about financing. Double quotes Mrs. Winters, what a pleasant surprise. How can I help you today? I'm interested in looking at sports cars, I said, letting my gaze wander across the showroom. Something with character, something that makes a statement, the salesman, whose nameplate read Jim Morrison, no relation to the singer, as he'd assured me yesterday, lit up like Christmas morning. We have several excellent options. What kind of statement are you looking to make? I smiled, thinking about Sarah and Marcus, probably still asleep at home, dreaming about their new toy. The kind that says I'm not going anywhere anytime soon. Jim showed me 3 different cars, but I kept coming back to one in particular, a silver Porsche 911. It was identical to the one Marcus had bought with my money, except this one was a 2024 model with only 300 miles on it. How much? I asked, running my fingers along the hood, just like Marcus had done yesterday. This one's $82,000, Jim said proudly, but it's worth every penny. Top of the line features. Barely driven. I pulled out my checkbook, the same account Sarah and Marcus had violated, and wrote a check for the full amount. Jim's eyes widened as he processed the sale. Mrs. Winters, I have to say, it's unusual to see someone pay cash for a vehicle like this. I handed him the check with a smile. At my age, you learn not to put off the things that make you happy. An hour later, I was driving my new Porsche home, the desert wind whipping through my hair as I took the long way through Scottsdale. The car handled like a dream, responsive, powerful, and exhilarating in a way that made me feel 20 years younger. When I pulled into my driveway, Sarah's car was already there. She was sitting on my front porch, her face tight with worry. Mom, where were you? I've been calling for an hour. She stood up as I got out of the Porsche, her eyes widening as she took in the car, my wind-blown hair, and the unmistakable glow of someone who had just made a big purchase. I went shopping, I said. Simply. I decided if Marcus could have a new car. I paused, smiling. So could I? Sarah's mouth opened and closed a few times like a fish out of water. Mom, you bought a Porsche? Her voice was barely a whisper. I did. Do you like it? I asked, patting the hood affectionately. It's exactly like Marcus's except newer. Sarah looked like she might faint. Mom, how much did this cost? The concern in her voice wasn't maternal anymore, it was financial panic. $82,000, I said cheerfully. But don't worry, according to you, I have plenty of money and I won't live long enough to spend it anyway. Sarah's face went pale. Mom, I didn't mean what I said yesterday. I was just what? I interrupted softly. Just assuming I was too weak to notice, too grateful for your help to question your decisions? I unlocked my front door and walked inside. We need to talk. In the living room, Sarah perched on the edge of the sofa, looking ready to bolt. Mom, about yesterday, she began nervously. I think there was a misunderstanding. I settled into my favorite chair, the one David had given me for my 60th birthday, and studied her face. What kind of misunderstanding, sweetheart? Well, when I gave Marcus your card, I was just, we've been talking about how grateful we are for everything you've done for us during your treatment. And Marcus has been working so hard, and he's been so worried about you. And when I saw how much he wanted that car, she was babbling now, her carefully built justification collapsing under its own weight. So you decided to spend my money as a thank you gift to your husband? I asked evenly, not angry, just curious. Without asking me first, Sarah's eyes filled with tears. I knew you'd say yes if I asked. You always do. You're so generous, Mom, sometimes too generous for your own good. That phrase, too generous for your own good, hit me like a revelation. How many times had I heard it over the years? From Sarah, when I donated to charity, from Marcus, when I helped one of their friends move, from neighbors, when I bought Girl Scout cookies I didn't even want. I'd always taken it as a compliment. But now, I heard it differently. It wasn't admiration, it was an accusation. A weakness they'd discussed behind my back. And the comment about me not living long enough to spend my money? I asked quietly. Sarah's face crumpled. Mom, the doctor said your prognosis was good, but cancer it's unpredictable. Marcus and I have just been talking about what would happen if the treatment didn't work. We just want to make sure you enjoy life while you can. By spending my money on things I'll never use, Sarah wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. By making sure the people we love get to experience happiness, the car makes Marcus so happy, Mom. You should see how he lights up when he talks about it, Sarah said, her voice shaking. I stood and walked to the window, looking down at my new Porsche gleaming in the afternoon sun. And my happiness. My right to make my own financial decisions, how do those factor into your calculations? The silence stretched between us. Finally, Sarah spoke, her voice small, defeated. We messed up, I see that now, but Mom, we can fix this. Marcus can return the car and we can pretend yesterday never happened. I turned to face her, seeing her clearly for perhaps the first time in years, my beautiful, capable daughter who'd somehow learned to see her mother as a resource to manage rather than a person to respect. Sarah, some things can't be taken back. Some trust, once broken, can't be repaired. What are you saying? Her voice quivered, panic creeping back in. I walked over and sat beside her on the sofa, taking her hands in mine. I'm saying that yesterday, when you handed Marcus my credit card, you made a choice. You chose to see me as someone whose money matters more than whose consent matters. And today, I'm making a choice too. Sarah's phone rang, breaking the moment. She glanced at the screen and her face went pale. It's Marcus. Mom, please, whatever you're planning. I squeezed her hands gently. Answer it, sweetheart. But remember, some conversations can't be unheard, just like some actions can't be undone. As she lifted the phone to her ear, I could hear Marcus' voice even from across the room, high-pitched with panic and unmistakably frightened. The investigation was moving faster than I expected. In a few hours, they'd both understand exactly how expensive their gratitude had been. Sarah's face went from pale to ashen as she listened. Even from where I sat, I caught fragments of his panicked explanation. FBI agents. Fraud investigation. They took the car. When she hung up, her hands trembled. Mom, what did you do? Her voice was barely a whisper. I stood and walked to the kitchen, needing something to occupy my hands. Making tea had always calmed me, and right now, I needed all the calm I could get. I reported the unauthorized use of my credit card, I said, filling the kettle with water. It's what any responsible person does when someone steals from them, Sarah followed, her movements jerky with fear. Steals? Mom, I'm your daughter. We're family. Family doesn't steal. I kept my back to her, focusing on the ritual of preparing tea. Earl Grey, to sugars, a splash of milk the same way I'd made it for 40 years. Family asks permission. Family respects boundaries. Family doesn't assume you're too weak or too dead to make your own choices. I could hear her crying behind me. Soft sobs that once would have made me drop everything to comfort her. Today, they sounded like the tears of someone who had finally realized the consequences of their actions. Marcus is at the police station, she said, her voice trembling. They're questioning him about fraud, federal fraud. Mom, do you know what that means? She added. I turned, leaning against the counter as I studied her face. It means the government takes stealing seriously, even when family members do it. The kettle whistled. I poured the hot water over the tea bags, watching the clear liquid turn amber. It means there are consequences for treating people like a team is. But you gave me access to that account years ago for emergencies, she said desperately. Grasping at any legal loophole that might save them, I nodded thoughtfully. I did give you emergency access for medical bills, home repairs, genuine crises. Was Marcus wanting a Porsche an emergency? Her silence was answer enough. I'd given her access after David's death, when I was overwhelmed with grief and grateful for her help managing my affairs. I had never imagined she would use that access to fund her husband's wish list. Mom, please. Sarah pleaded, her voice breaking. You can stop this. You can tell them it was a misunderstanding, that you gave permission after all. I poured the tea into 2 cups, adding sugar and milk to both. Even in the middle of a family crisis, some habits die hard. Drink your tea, I said, handing her a cup. We need to talk about some things you don't know. Sarah wrapped her hands around the warm cup like it was an anchor. What things? She asked. I settled across from her at my kitchen table, the same table where we'd shared countless conversations over the years. Homework help, boy troubles, college plans, wedding arrangements, never anything like this. Did you know that when your father died, he left me more than just the life insurance policy? I asked. Sarah looked confused. What do you mean? The insurance was $100,000 and you had your savings, I smiled, remembering David's quiet pride in his financial planning. Your father was much more careful with money than anyone knew. He had investments, pension benefits, real estate holdings he never talked about. He was old-fashioned that way, thought money talk was ungentlemanly. Sarah's cup clinked against her saucer as she set it down with unsteady hands. How much more? She whispered. Enough that the $84,000 you and Marcus spent yesterday represents about 2% of my total assets, I said calmly. I'm not poor, Sarah, I'm not desperate, and I'm not dying anytime soon. The color drained completely from her face. 2%, I nodded. Dr. Morrison gave me a 93% 5-year survival rate. My oncologist expects me to live another 20 to 25 years. Plenty of time to spend my money on things I actually want. Sarah stared at me as if I were a stranger. But you live so modestly. You drive that old Honda, you shop at discount stores. You never. I learned from your father that living below your means is how you stay comfortable. Just because I have money doesn't mean I need to flaunt it, I said, sipping my tea and letting that sink in. Unlike some people who think a windfall is permission to buy toys. My phone rang, interrupting the tension. Detective Santos's number flashed on the screen. Excuse me, I said to Sarah, answering the call. Helen, we've got Marcus here for questioning, Ramon said without preamble. The federal agents want to know if you're willing to come in and give a formal statement. Of course, I replied, watching Sarah's face crumble as she realized the investigation was real and moving forward. Should I come now? I asked. That would be helpful. And Helen, you should know your son-in-law is claiming his wife told him you'd given permission for the purchase. The agents will want to ask you about that specifically after I hung up. Sarah stared at me with a mixture of fear and something that looked almost like respect. You're really going to testify against us? She whispered. I finished my tea and stood up. I'm going to tell the truth, Sarah. I never gave permission for the purchase. And you and Marcus took my card without authorization. The rest is up to the investigators. Sarah started crying again, harder this time. Mom, please. Marcus could go to prison. I could go to prison. We're talking about our lives here. I paused at the kitchen doorway, looking back at my daughter. At 32, she was still beautiful, still capable of breaking hearts with her tears, but she was also old enough to know better. You should have thought about that before you decided my money was yours to spend, I said gently. Actions have consequences, sweetheart. It's a lesson I should have taught you better when you were younger. As I gathered my purse and keys, Sarah followed me to the front door. What happens now? She asked. I looked out at my silver Porsche, then at her tear-stained face. Now you and Marcus learn what it costs to underestimate a cancer survivor. Who's tired of being everyone's piggy bank? The drive to the police station was surprisingly peaceful. For the first time in months, I felt like I was exactly where I needed to be, doing exactly what needed to be done. Sarah and Marcus had made their choice at that dealership. Now I was making mine, but first, I had one more stop to make. There was still something they didn't know about their perfect crime, and it was going to change everything. The Phoenix Federal Building was more intimidating than I expected. All glass and steel reaching toward the desert sky like a monument to justice. Detective Santos met me in the lobby. His familiar face a comfort in the sterile government environment. Helen, I have to say, you look remarkably calm for someone about to put her own daughter in federal custody. He said as we waited for the elevator. I adjusted my purse strap, feeling the weight of the documents I'd brought. Maybe that's because I know something they don't. The FBI agents, Sarah Richardson and Michael Chen, were professional but intense. Agent Richardson, a woman about Sarah's age with steel gray eyes, led the questioning while Agent Chen took meticulous notes. Mrs. Winters, can you walk us through exactly what happened at Henderson's luxury cars yesterday? I recounted everything in detail, the stop at the dealership, Marcus' excitement over the Porsche, Sarah's casual announcement about my finances, and her unauthorized use of my credit card. Agent Richardson's expression stayed neutral. But I caught Agent Chen exchanging a look with Detective Santos when I mentioned the $500,000. Did you at any point give verbal permission for this purchase? Agent Richardson asked. No, I said firmly. I was in shock. I had just finished my final chemotherapy treatment, and my daughter was discussing my death and my money as if I wasn't even there. Agent Chen leaned forward. Mrs. Winters, your daughter claims she had previous authorization to use your accounts for family expenses. I opened my purse and pulled out a folder I'd prepared that morning. She did have emergency access, which is why I brought these. I spread the documents across the conference table, bank statements showing every transaction Sarah had made over the past 3 years. Each one carefully highlighted and annotated. Emergency dental work for her husband. $4,000 to $100 emergency vacation to Hawaii. $8,500 emergency kitchen renovation. $15,000. I looked up at Agent Richardson. Apparently, everything in their lives qualifies as an emergency except asking my permission first. Detective Santos whistled low. Helen, how much are we talking about in total? I'd spent 2 hours that morning with my calculator and banking records. Over the past 3 years, Sarah has withdrawn $127,000 from my accounts. The Porsche purchase was just the largest single transaction. Agent Chen's pen froze. Mrs. Winters, are you saying this pattern of unauthorized access has been going on for years? I nodded. I've been documenting everything, but I kept making excuses. She was helping me after David's death. She supported me through cancer treatment. She was family. I convinced myself that family meant sharing everything. Agent Richardson studied the bank statements. This goes beyond simple fraud. We're looking at a pattern of financial exploitation spanning multiple years. She looked up at me. Mrs. Winters, I have to ask. Are you prepared for the full scope of charges this evidence could support? That was the question I had been dreading and anticipating all morning. Agent Richardson, how much trouble are Sarah and Marcus actually facing? I asked. She consulted her notes. Based on the single credit card incident alone, we're looking at federal fraud charges that could carry 5 to 10 years. With this pattern of financial exploitation you've documented. She paused. We could be talking about significantly more time. The weight of what I'd set in motion settled around me like a heavy blanket. And if I choose not to pursue the additional charges? If I limit this to just the Porsche incident? I asked. You can't choose which federal crimes to prosecute, Mrs. Winters, Agent Chen said. Once we have evidence of criminal activity, the decision to proceed belongs to the federal prosecutor, not to you. The room fell quiet. The air conditioning humming overhead. I thought about Sarah sitting in my kitchen this morning, crying over tea and asking what would happen next. She had no idea that her unauthorized access to my accounts over the years had created a paper trail that could put her in prison for decades. Mrs. Winters, Agent Richardson said gently. There is one factor that could significantly impact the charges and sentencing. I looked up hopefully. What factor? Cooperation and restitution, she said. If your daughter and her husband cooperate fully with the investigation and make complete restitution for all unauthorized transactions, that could influence how the prosecutor handles the case. Complete restitution would be $127,000. Agent Chen added, nodding. Plus interest, penalties, and court costs. We're probably looking at $150,000 total. That number hung in the air between us. I knew exactly how much money Sarah and Marcus had in their accounts, because she had been complaining about their finances for months. They don't have that kind of money, I said quietly. Maybe $20,000 at most, then they'll need to figure out how to get it, Agent Richardson said. Liquidate assets, secure loans, sell property. The court won't be sympathetic to defendants who spent money they couldn't afford to repay. As I prepared to leave the federal building, Detective Santos walked me to my car. Helen, I have to ask, are you okay with how serious this has become? I looked back at the building, where my daughter and son-in-law were probably being processed for federal crimes. Raoni. For 3 years, I've been the family ATM, I said. I've watched them spend my money on luxuries while I shopped at thrift stores, and worried about being a burden. Yesterday at that dealership, I realized they weren't just taking my money, they were taking my dignity. I unlocked my Porsche. Still strange and wonderful after just 1 day of ownership. Now they were going to learn that every choice has a price, and some lessons are more expensive than others. As I drove home, I thought about the phone call I'd need to make. Sarah and Marcus would be released on their own reconnaissance within a few hours, and someone would need to explain exactly how deep a hole they'd dug for themselves. They thought they'd been cleverly managing my finances for years. Instead, they'd been documenting their own crimes, one transaction at a time. The irony was almost beautiful. In trying to spend my money before I died, they'd created the evidence that might cost them decades of their own lives. But I wasn't done yet. There was still one more surprise. Waiting, one final lesson about what happens when you underestimate a woman who spent 68 years learning how to survive. Sarah and Marcus were waiting on my front porch when I got home from the federal building, both looking like they'd aged 10 years in 10 hours. Marcus' face was pale and drawn, his usual confidence replaced by the hollow-eyed look of someone who'd just seen his future evaporate. Sarah's tears had dried, leaving streaked makeup and an eerily calm expression. Mom, Sarah said as I walked up the front steps. We need to talk. I imagine you do, I replied, unlocking the door and gesturing for them to follow me inside. In my living room, they sat together on the sofa, holding hands like survivors of a shipwreck. Marcus spoke first, his voice hoarse from hours of interrogation. Helen, I need you to know that I never intended for this to become what it's become. When Sarah gave me your card yesterday, I honestly thought you'd given permission. I settled into my chair, studying their faces. And when she told you I had $500,000 and wouldn't live long enough to spend it, what did you think then? Marcus winced. I thought she was being dramatic. You know how Sarah gets when she's emotional. Sarah shot him a sharp look. Don't put this on me, Marcus. You were practically drooling over that car before I said anything about mom's money. So now you're turning on each other, I observed. How quickly family loyalty disappears when consequences arrive. They both looked stricken. And I almost felt sorry for them, almost. The FBI agents explained what you're facing. I continued. Federal fraud charges, possibly conspiracy, definitely financial exploitation of an elderly person. Mom, please, Sarah said, her voice breaking again. We know we messed up, but there has to be something we can do. Some way to fix this. I leaned back in my chair. Feeling strangely peaceful despite the chaos surrounding us. There is one way, I said. According to the agents. Complete restitution plus cooperation with the investigation. Marcus sat up straighter. How much restitution? I pulled out the folder of bank statements I'd shown the FBI. $127,000 you've taken over the past 3 years, plus interest and penalties. They estimate about $150,000 total. The silence that followed was deafening. Finally, Marcus spoke. His voice barely above a whisper. We don't have that kind of money. I nodded sympathetically. I know, your mortgage is $2,400 a month. Your car payments are $800. Your credit cards are nearly maxed out. Your savings account has about $18,000 in it. Sarah stared at me in shock. How do you know our exact finances? I smiled. Sarah, sweetheart, I've been listening to you complain about money for 3 years. You've told me every detail of your financial struggles, usually right before asking me for help. I opened the folder wider, spreading the highlighted sections across the table. Emergency dental work, emergency vacation, emergency furniture, emergency car repairs. Funny how every emergency coincided with something you wanted but couldn't afford. Marcus read through the documents, his face growing paler with each page. Jesus, I didn't realize how often we'd stolen from you. I said gently, the word you're looking for is stolen, Marcus. Sarah was crying again. But quietly this time, like she'd finally run out of dramatic energy. Mom, what are we going to do? We could go to prison for years. Our lives are ruined. I stood and walked to the window, looking out at my silver Porsche gleaming in the late afternoon sun. Your lives aren't ruined, Sarah. They're just more complicated now. I turned back to face them. And I'm going to help you because that's what mothers do. Both of them looked up hopefully. You'll tell the FBI it was all a misunderstanding? Marcus asked. I shook my head. No, Marcus. I'm going to tell them the truth. But I'm also going to help you raise the restitution money. Sarah looked confused. How? We don't have any assets worth that much. I walked to my desk and pulled out another folder, one they'd never seen before. Actually, you do. You just don't know it yet. I spread the papers across the coffee table. Property deeds, investment portfolios, bank statements from accounts they didn't even know existed. When your father died, Sarah, he left instructions for his estate that I never fully explained to you. Sarah picked up one of the documents, her hands shaking. This is a deed to property in Sedona. I've never heard of this address. I nodded. Your father bought that land 30 years ago as an investment. It's worth about $200,000 now. I pointed to another document. This is his pension fund. It's been earning interest for 6 years. And this is a trust fund he set up for you when you were born. Marcus stared at the papers as if they were written in a foreign language. Helen, what are you saying? I sat back down, feeling the weight of years of secrecy lifting. I'm saying David was much more financially sophisticated than anyone knew. He didn't just leave me comfortable, he made sure Sarah would be comfortable, too. When she was mature enough to handle the responsibility, Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. How much? I consulted the most recent statements. Your inheritance, which I've been managing since your father's death, is worth approximately $180. Zero, the number echoed in the quiet room. Combined with liquidating the Sedona property, you have enough to make full restitution and still have money left over. But why didn't you tell me? Sarah asked, a mix of confusion and anger in her voice. Why did you let me struggle? Let us worry about money when there was this whole inheritance waiting. I met her eyes steadily. Over the years, I noticed changes in your attitude about money, what you felt entitled to. Your father made me promise not to give it to you until you learned the value of money. Until you learned to respect other people's financial boundaries. After watching how you handled my accounts these past 3 years, I knew he was right to be concerned. Marcus was doing mental calculations, trying to figure out how they could repay the money and avoid prison. I nodded. You can make restitution, probably negotiate plea deals that avoid significant jail time, and start your lives over with a better understanding of consequences. Sarah stared at the inheritance documents like they might disappear. Then she asked the question I'd been waiting for. Mom, if I have this money, why did we spend years taking from your accounts? I gathered up the papers, holding her financial future in my hands. Because it was easier to take from me than to wait for what was rightfully yours. Because you assumed I was too old, too sick, or too grateful to notice or care. Your inheritance comes with conditions now, I said, letting the words sink in. Conditions your father never anticipated but have become necessary. Sarah and Marcus both looked at me with growing apprehension. What conditions? They asked almost in unison. First, I said, complete restitution to my accounts within 30 days. Second, formal letters of apology acknowledging that you stole from me, not borrowed. I corrected softly. Third, you'll attend financial counseling to learn how to manage money responsibly. I paused, letting that sink in. And fourth, you'll never have access to my personal accounts again, ever. Marcus nodded quickly. Those seem reasonable. Helen, we're grateful for this chance to make things right. But Sarah was looking at me with an expression I'd never seen before, not gratitude, but calculation. And if we refuse these conditions? She asked quietly. If we decide to take our chances with the federal charges? I smiled, recognizing that familiar rebellious streak. Then you go to prison, and your inheritance goes to the Phoenix Children's Hospital in your name. Either way, you won't be spending my money anymore. The room fell silent as Sarah and Marcus absorbed the reality of their situation. They could accept help with strings attached or face federal charges with their pride intact. It wasn't much of a choice, but it was more than they'd given me at that dealership. We accept. Marcus said finally. Sarah nodded reluctantly. We accept all the conditions. We'll do whatever it takes. I stood up, feeling lighter than I had in years. Good, then we'll start the restitution process tomorrow. Tonight, I'm taking my new Porsche out for dinner to celebrate my recovery. As I gathered my purse and keys, Sarah called out softly, Mom, are we going to be okay? Our relationship, I paused at the front door, looking back at my daughter and son-in-law. They looked young, scared, and for the first time since this all began, genuinely sorry, Sarah. I said gently. For the first time in 3 years, we have a chance to build a relationship based on mutual respect instead of financial dependency. Whether we're okay depends on whether you can learn to see me as your mother, instead of your bank account. As I drove away in my Porsche, windows down and music up, I thought about the strange journey from victim to victor. It had started with a casual betrayal at a car dealership, and ended with a family that might finally understand the difference between love and exploitation. Sarah and Marcus had learned that stealing from family wasn't consequence-free, and I'd learned something to that. Sometimes the people who love you most are the ones who respect you least. But most importantly, I realized that cancer might have tried to kill me, but I was far too stubborn to die before I finished teaching the people I loved how to treat me properly. The desert sunset painted the sky in brilliant oranges and purples as I drove toward my favorite restaurant, a cancer survivor in a silver Porsche. Finally free to spend my own money on my own happiness, and if that wasn't worth celebrating, nothing was. 3 months later, Sarah and Marcus had completed their restitution, attended financial counseling, and rebuilt their relationship with money and with me. The federal charges were reduced to misdemeanors with community service, and they were slowly earning back my trust through actions, not words. But that's another story entirely. This one ends with a simple truth: never underestimate a woman who survived cancer, raised children, and finally learned that love without respect isn't love at all. It's just exploitation with prettier packaging. And sometimes the best revenge is simply refusing to be anyone's victim ever again. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.